Welcome, esteemed gentlemen. Silence is the most powerful scream. In a world where noise often drowns out strategy, Sigmas prove that the loudest weapon isn't always the sharpest. These enigmatic individuals thrive in the shadows, outwitting their enemies not with brute force, but with an almost surgical precision. Here's a little-known fact. Most conflicts aren't won by the strongest or loudest. They're won by those who know how to think 10 moves ahead. Sigmas don't just play the game, they redesign the entire board while their enemies are busy arguing over the rules. Picture this. While their rivals are charging headfirst into battle, making grand declarations like villains in a bad action movie, the Sigma is already halfway to victory, sipping their coffee and casually watching the chaos unfold. With a mix of intellect, composure, and an uncanny ability to turn the tables, Sigmas don't just defeat their enemies, they leave them wondering if the battle ever happened at all. So how do they do it? What makes them so different from everyone else? Get ready to uncover the genius ways Sigmas effortlessly put their enemies to shame, and maybe take a page or two from their playbook. Number 1. Creating contradictions in their opponents. Sigmas have a unique way of exposing their enemies, not through loud accusations or confrontations, but by creating subtle contradictions that make their opponents unravel on their own. They don't need to raise their voice or force a point. Instead, they focus on staying calm, logical, and consistent in their actions and words. This consistency is a sharp contrast to the chaotic, emotionally driven behavior of their enemies, and it creates a silent but powerful spotlight on the hypocrisy and weaknesses of those trying to oppose them. Enemies often thrive on drama, overplaying their hand or relying on manipulative tactics to gain the upper hand. Sigmas, however, don't bite the bait. They simply observe and wait. They know that by remaining level-headed, they make their enemies look unbalanced and irrational by comparison. It's not about directly calling someone out. It's about creating an environment where the truth reveals itself. The beauty of this approach is that Sigmas never need to justify themselves. Their actions, or lack of reaction, often speak louder than any argument. Their enemies end up doing all the work, tripping over their inconsistencies and exposing their flaws for everyone to see. It's almost as if the Sigma holds up a mirror, and the enemy's reflection is what causes their downfall. By sticking to their principles and refusing to stoop to petty tactics, Sigmas not only maintain their dignity, but also force their enemies to face their own contradictions. It's a silent victory, one that requires no celebration or announcement. And yet, it's one of the most effective ways to put an opponent to shame, letting them crumble under the weight of their own missteps. Number 2. Mental jiu-jitsu. Sigmas have mastered the art of mental jiu-jitsu, a strategy that takes advantage of an opponent's own momentum and weaknesses. Rather than confronting their enemies head-on or retaliating with force, they patiently let their opponents overextend themselves, emotionally, mentally, or strategically, and then flip that energy back onto them. It's a brilliant play that relies on subtlety and precision, turning the enemy's aggression into their own downfall. The brilliance of this tactic is in its simplicity. Sigmas don't need to be the aggressors. They recognize that most people, especially in conflict, act impulsively and tend to expose their vulnerabilities when they get overly emotional or desperate. Sigmas remain calm and strategic, waiting for their enemies to make a move that is so predictable it becomes almost laughable. Once their enemy has committed to a course of action, the Sigma calmly redirects that energy. Maybe the enemy's attack is a verbal assault full of bravado or a strategy built on faulty assumptions. Instead of fighting back, Sigmas turn it around by pointing out inconsistencies, using the enemy's own words against them, or simply reframing the situation so that the opponent becomes the one at fault. This redirecting of energy leaves the enemy overextended, exhausted from their own actions, and often humiliated. The beauty of mental jiu-jitsu is that it doesn't require a Sigma to raise a finger. It's about playing the long game and understanding how to manipulate the flow of energy in the room. Instead of draining their own resources, Sigmas let their enemies exhaust themselves through their own aggression, then deliver the final blow, not with force, but with quiet, unrelenting logic that leaves their opponent feeling drained, defeated, and thoroughly embarrassed. Number 3. Outthinking, not outshouting. Sigmas understand that raising their voice or engaging in heated arguments only wastes energy and validates their enemies. Instead, they focus on something far more effective, dismantling their opponent's arguments with razor-sharp logic and subtle precision. They don't shout to be heard. They let the power of their intellect speak for itself. Their method begins with observation. Sigmas are masters of listening and analyzing, carefully picking apart every word and action of their opponent. They identify weak points, inconsistencies, and assumptions in their enemy's arguments, storing them like ammunition. When the time is right, they strike, not with aggression but with calm, calculated reasoning that leaves no room for rebuttal. This isn't about being loud or flamboyant, it's about being undeniable. Sigmas don't just present counter-arguments, they present truths so precise that their enemies are left with no choice but to question their own stance. It's not uncommon for their opponents to feel intellectually cornered, realizing that their entire position has been dismantled without a single raised voice or dramatic gesture. Sigmas also know the power of timing. They don't rush to respond or react in the heat of the moment. Instead, they allow the argument to unfold, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to deliver their point. Their calm demeanor often unnerves their opponents, making it clear that they're not just arguing, they're controlling the entire exchange. This approach isn't just effective, it's humiliating for the opposition. Being outshouted can be ignored, but being outthought leaves a lasting impression. It's a quiet yet devastating strategy that turns any confrontation into a showcase of the Sigma's intellectual superiority, leaving their enemies scrambling for words and ultimately defeated. Number 4. The burn without touching. Approach. Sigmas have a remarkable ability to burn without touching, a tactic that strikes at the core of their enemy's insecurities without a single word of aggression. Rather than launching direct attacks or engaging in petty drama, they plant subtle truths, seemingly innocuous comments or observations that continue to linger in their enemies' minds long after the conversation ends. These truths don't need to be harsh or loud. They are quiet, calculated, and devastating in their simplicity. The key to this approach is psychological manipulation. Sigmas don't need to tell their enemies they're wrong or flawed, because the enemy already knows it deep down. What Sigmas do is gently nudge at the truth, forcing their opponents to confront their own doubts and insecurities without even realizing it. The resulting mental unraveling often happens silently and internally, as their enemies overthink, analyze, and question their worth or actions. It's a masterstroke of indirect confrontation. Sigmas don't engage in the battle themselves. They don't need to. Instead, they leave their enemies to fight within their own minds, wrestling with doubts and second-guessing their decisions. By planting these small seeds of truth, Sigmas leave their enemies to destroy themselves, and by the time they realize what's happened, they're already too deep into their own mental turmoil to recover. This approach doesn't require the Sigma to lower themselves to their enemy's level. They don't need to prove anything. The power of their words is in their ability to make others question themselves. It's a slow burn, one that leaves the opponent with no clear cause of defeat, only the uncomfortable, lingering feeling that they've somehow been bested by their own mind. Number 5. Making enemies irrelevant. Sigmas have an almost supernatural ability to make their enemies feel utterly insignificant. They don't waste time fighting battles that don't serve their greater purpose, nor do they feed the ego of their opponents by giving them attention. Instead, they operate as though their enemies don't even exist, and this strategy is far more devastating than any direct confrontation. Enemies thrive on attention, whether it's admiration or opposition, and Sigmas deny them both. By refusing to engage, they strip their opponents of the validation they seek. It's not passive avoidance. It's a calculated dismissal that makes it painfully clear the Sigma sees no value in the conflict. Without acknowledgement, the enemy's efforts become futile, like shouting into a void. What's more, Sigmas continue to thrive and succeed despite any attempts to derail them. They focus entirely on their own goals, pouring their energy into self-growth, strategic moves, and forward momentum. Every step they take towards success serves as a quiet reminder to their enemies, "You're irrelevant here." The more the Sigma accomplishes, the more their opponent feels like an afterthought in the grand scheme of things. The psychological impact of this approach is profound. For an enemy, being ignored can feel worse than losing. It denies them the satisfaction of even being seen as a worthy adversary. While other personalities might lash out, argue, or retaliate, the Sigma moves forward in silence, leaving their enemies to stew in their own irrelevance. In the end, the Sigma doesn't need to win a battle. They simply make the battlefield unnecessary. By reducing their enemies to mere spectators, Sigmas deliver a crushing defeat without lifting a finger, proving that sometimes the most powerful move is no move at all. Number 6. Unveiling the enemy's weakest links. Sigmas excel at uncovering the hidden flaws and weaknesses of their enemies, and they do it with a level of patience and precision that feels almost surgical. They don't rush into conflict or confront their opponents head-on. Instead, they observe from the shadows, studying their enemy's behavior, patterns, and vulnerabilities with unwavering focus. This isn't a hasty process. Sigmas understand the value of time and leverage it to their advantage. They take note of every inconsistency, every emotional overreaction, and every blind spot their opponent unknowingly reveals. While most people are reactive, Sigmas remain composed, treating every interaction as an opportunity to learn. They see what others overlook, whether it's a tendency to rely on certain tactics, an overinflated ego, or a critical lack of self-awareness. Once they've identified the cracks, Sigmas don't strike immediately. They know that timing is everything, and an ill-timed move can do more harm than good. They wait until the perfect moment, when their enemy is overconfident, distracted, or already teetering on the edge of a mistake. Then, they exploit the weakness with precision, delivering a blow so effective that recovery becomes nearly impossible. What makes this strategy so devastating is that it often feels like the enemy has been undone by their own flaws, rather than an external attack. The Sigma simply shines a light on what was already broken, forcing their opponent to confront their own instability. It's a subtle but powerful form of defeat, one that leaves the enemy not just humiliated, but questioning themselves. By turning observation into a weapon and patience into a strategy, Sigmas don't just win. They expose the very foundation of their enemy's fragility, ensuring the victory is as complete as it is inevitable. Number 7. Turning opposition into opportunity. Sigmas have a unique ability to flip the script when faced with opposition. They don't see enemies as obstacles to avoid or battles to fight. Instead, they view them as opportunities for growth, reflection, and strategy. Every confrontation, criticism, or attempt to undermine them becomes raw material they can refine into something valuable. When enemies challenge them, Sigmas don't react emotionally or impulsively. Instead, they absorb the energy of the attack, treating it as feedback. What weaknesses did their enemy exploit? What strategies did they use? Sigmas analyze every detail, not just to neutralize the current threat, but to prepare for any similar challenges in the future. It's not just about surviving the opposition, it's about evolving because of it. Sigmas are also masters at turning criticism into clarity. While others may feel disheartened by negative opinions, Sigmas use them to identify blind spots or refine their approach. If a criticism holds merit, they address it. If it's baseless, they let it roll off their back, gaining confidence in their ability to remain unaffected. Either way, they emerge stronger. Even the act of being underestimated by enemies becomes an advantage. Sigmas use this misjudgment as cover, operating under the radar until the time is right to reveal their full strength. They leverage their enemies' mistakes, learning from their tactics, and using those same methods to outmaneuver them. What sets Sigmas apart is their ability to transform adversity into fuel. Instead of letting opposition hinder their progress, they turn it into a stepping stone, climbing higher and gaining perspective. In this way, enemies unwittingly contribute to a Sigma's success, becoming part of the story of how they rose to the top. For Sigmas, opposition isn't a roadblock. It's a necessary part of the journey forward. Number 8. The invisible battle. Sigmas are masters of the invisible battle, a type of conflict that happens entirely beneath the surface. They don't engage in loud confrontations or flashy displays of dominance. Instead, they work quietly, strategically, dismantling their opposition without leaving any trace of their involvement. By the time their enemies realize what's happened, the damage is already done, and the Sigma has moved on, leaving no evidence of the hand that orchestrated their defeat. This approach begins with observation. Sigmas are hyper-aware of their surroundings and the people in them. They study their enemies' motives, tactics, and weak points without drawing attention to themselves. They don't just see what's on the surface, they dig deeper, understanding the forces driving their opponent's actions. This knowledge becomes their greatest weapon, allowing them to anticipate moves before they happen. Rather than engaging directly, Sigmas operate in the background, influencing events in subtle but impactful ways. They might redirect attention away from themselves, quietly undermine their enemy's plans, or manipulate circumstances to turn the odds in their favor. Sigmas don't seek credit for their actions. They care more about results than recognition. This makes them almost impossible to trace or predict. What makes this strategy so effective is that it's unnoticeable until it's too late. Enemies who expect a direct confrontation find themselves battling shadows, their plans unraveling without understanding why. The Sigma's ability to dismantle opposition without confrontation not only ensures their success, but also leaves their enemies confused and demoralized. In the end, the invisible battle isn't just about winning, it's about winning with such elegance that the enemy is left wondering if the fight even took place. For Sigmas, this subtle yet devastating approach is the ultimate display of control and intelligence. Number 9. Turning weakness into camouflage. Sigmas possess an unconventional ability to turn their perceived weaknesses into powerful camouflage. They don't waste time trying to appear flawless or invincible. Instead, they allow their vulnerabilities to be seen, knowing that these flaws will act as distractions for their enemies. What seems like a chink in their armor is actually a carefully positioned decoy designed to misdirect attention and create a false sense of security. By allowing their weaknesses to take center stage, Sigmas create a psychological trap. Enemies are naturally drawn to exploit what they perceive as an obvious flaw, pouring their energy and focus into an area that's ultimately irrelevant. Meanwhile, Sigmas are silently positioning themselves to strike where it truly matters, areas their opponents never even considered. This strategy works because it plays on human nature. Most people, when they spot a weakness in someone else, immediately assume they have the upper hand. Sigmas let their enemies feel confident, even overconfident, creating the perfect setup for an unexpected move. When the strike finally comes, it's swift, precise, and devastating, leaving their enemies blindsided and humiliated. What makes this approach so effective is its subtlety. Enemies never suspect they're being manipulated because Sigmas don't fight the battle directly. Instead, they let their opponents dig their own graves, all while remaining calm and seemingly vulnerable. By the time the enemy realizes the truth, it's far too late to recover. Turning weakness into camouflage isn't just about strategy, it's about mastery of perception. Sigmas understand that power isn't always about strength. It's about knowing how to control the narrative and use others' assumptions against them. In this way, their weaknesses aren't liabilities, they're the ultimate weapons of deception. Number 10, the power of underestimation. Sigmas understand the power of being underestimated better than anyone. They deliberately play low-key, deliberately presenting themselves as less capable, less intelligent, or less ambitious than they actually are. This unassuming facade works to their advantage in ways that others simply cannot grasp. While their enemies are busy writing them off as insignificant or harmless, Sigmas are silently observing, calculating, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. By flying under the radar, Sigmas avoid attracting unnecessary attention or provocation. allowing their enemies to become complacent and overconfident. The brilliance of this strategy lies in its simplicity. While their rivals are busy focusing on more obvious threats, Sigmas bide their time, never giving away their full potential. Their enemies are so convinced of their weakness or insignificance that they don't see the sudden shift coming. When the moment arrives and the Sigma decides to make their move, the contrast is stark. What was once thought of as a non-threat suddenly becomes a force to be reckoned with. The brilliance, skill, or knowledge they've been hiding is unleashed with such precision and effectiveness that it leaves their opponents utterly humiliated. They're caught completely off guard, unable to comprehend how they were bested by someone they had dismissed as nothing more than a quiet observer. The beauty of this tactic is that it turns the tables completely. Sigmas don't just win, they make their victory feel almost unfair. By allowing others to underestimate them, they gain a tactical advantage, one that renders their success not only inevitable, but also profoundly embarrassing for those who thought they could ignore them. In the end, Sigmas don't just succeed, they redefine the rules of the game. Their methods are unconventional, their strategies elusive, and their ability to remain calm in the face of chaos is nothing short of extraordinary. They don't rely on brute force, loud declarations, or petty rivalries to achieve victory. Instead, they use their minds, patience, and quiet precision to dismantle obstacles, leaving a trail of defeated enemies who never saw them coming. What makes the Sigma approach so powerful is its elegance. There's no need for brute confrontation, no grand gestures. Their success lies in the quiet, calculated moves that happen behind the scenes, unnoticed, but undeniably effective. They play a long game, understanding that true power isn't about being seen or heard, but about mastering the art of subtlety, observation, and strategic thinking. Every battle they face becomes an opportunity for growth, for outwitting, for turning opposition into an advantage. They absorb energy from their enemies, turning it into fuel for their own ascent, and in doing so, they leave their rivals looking not just defeated but confused, wondering how they were outmaneuvered. In a world obsessed with loud victories and flashy accomplishments, the Sigma thrives in the shadows, creating an almost mythical presence that others can't help but respect, even as they can never quite understand how the Sigma always comes out on top. They teach us that sometimes the most powerful victories are the ones fought without ever raising a fist, and that true mastery comes not from dominating others, but from mastering oneself. If you found these insights into the Sigma mindset both intriguing and eye-opening, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on more game-changing strategies. Like, comment, and share this with anyone who needs to see how true mastery works. Because greatness doesn't just happen, it's calculated. Join the conversation and let us know how you've seen the Sigma way in action. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.